All right, welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. We got the NIA boys in the place. We got Jack Butcher, founder of Visualize Value, me, Master Flex, Trung Phan, and I'm Bilal Zaidi. Boys, it's a big week. Lots going on. Today, we're going to talk about Facebook rebranding to Meta. We're going to talk about what that means, how crazy it is that they're changing out after 20 years of using their name. We're going to talk about inflation because Jack Dorsey had talked about hyperinflation. So we're going to discuss what inflation is, what's causing it, and how likely hyperinflation is, and some takes on that. Trung's going to have a fun fact fan and break down Formula One in America and how it got so big here. And lastly, we'll talk about NFTs and real estate and ownership with NFTs. So let's kick it off, boys. What's going on with this Meta stuff? Because I know, Trung, you said it was going to be smoking meats time. You've been making this joke for a few weeks, and we weren't too far off. Like, how are you feeling about it? So
last Thursday we recorded when the rumor came out that it was going to rename to Meta, and people are actually listening to that right now, getting some comments about that. The joke that we all kind of shared was just what is they going to rename the company to? And obviously Zuck loves smoking meats. And I did this meme of like all the Facebook logos through the years. And it was like, it kept on changing and looking more modern. And then the most recent one, I just put Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. And that had a good kick to it. But it turns out, so Zuck just did the Facebook Connect Prezzo. Did you guys watch it? The live presentation or any of it?
Not yet.
And he just did a presentation. It's kind of weird. It's like, he was like Neo in the Matrix going through these different worlds. Like he was showing people like in his backyard, he was like fencing. And then he was showing people like he was in an office, like work, like all virtual, right? And then showing people he was on the beach surfing, like really like he was basically in the Matrix or like Data on the holodeck in Star Trek. But the one that got me was there's this, he started the presentation in his home. And in the background had a bookshelf. And on the bookshelf was a bottle of Sweet Baby Ray's, a total Easter egg. And I'm like, yo, is that for real? I threw it on Twitter. And then Adam Morrissey, the head of Instagram, actually sent a wink emoji, replied to my tweet. So it's like, confirm the Easter egg. But anyways, man, so the TLDR, Facebook has changed its name to Meta in reference to the Metaverse, obviously. Before today, on their earnings call 2 days ago, they actually made two really big announcements. Number one is that Facebook's earnings this year will be reduced, or operating profits will be reduced by $10 billion because they're investing that much into quote unquote hardware, VR, and the metaverse. So, and actually the stock market response is like, yeah, whatever. Zuckerberg is still the only founder-led of the FANG company. So they're like kind of giving him credit, which we'll talk about later. And the other part of it was that they're spinning out the Facebook Reality Labs, which is the AR, VR department, does the hardware. And they're turning that into this own reporting segment. And the reason they're obviously doing that is because this is going to be, they're driving the entire focus. They want investors to think about it. They want competitors. They want suppliers. They want consumers to think about them. Hey, listen, this is the future that we're moving towards. And we talked about last week. It's all because he wants to own a platform. He does not want to have what happened to him with the iPhone to happen again on the next computing platform. He's obviously made a massive bet on VR. They own Oculus. They're by far the leader in the space. Whether or not that becomes the next computing platform, we'll find out. But that's the bet he's making. And that is what this unveiling, which we kind of guessed of last week, was happening. But I had a question for Jack. Jack, you're the branding expert here, okay? And you think very long and hard about these things. You're throwing away the Facebook name. What do you think about that?
I was thinking about it just since we brought it up before we started recording. And the Facebook product is still going to be called Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And I think adoption curve wise, like if you haven't heard of Facebook or you don't use Facebook at this point, then you're probably,
never going to use it.
You're never going to use it. So it's like maybe the saturation of the Facebook meme is at its peak and maybe even declining. So now if you think about like the metaverse meme is like hitting its exponential phase, and like CNBC, what's the metaverse? Wall Street Journal, what's the metaverse? Fortune magazine, enter the metaverse, all of this stuff. It's it feels like an intelligent way to sort of hijack the momentum of this meme and get like a enormous amount of capital, like a way to get exposure in inverted commas, because nobody knows what the metaverse is, or there's no single, like, it's like saying betting on the internet, right? It's this term that is, maybe it's even less defined than the internet because it could be kind of anything. It's this all-encompassing buzzword for the next phase of human interaction on the internet. But it feels to me like they have a significant advantage in sort of hijacking that term, because there's a lot of institutional and retail capital that will just be like, oh, metaverse, that's Facebook.
Yeah, that's a great point, man.
And it's already seeded, and obviously, like, the guy's not an idiot, and there's a lot of people working there that are extremely smart, and they're probably seeing this like groundswell of attention. That's like, when social media was the buzzword, and at CNBC, it's like new social media platform. Nobody even talks about social media anymore because it's like the fabric of society at this point. So it doesn't create any. It's
like the
momentum.
internet. It's like saying the internet now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you don't reference it as like this phenomenon, but the metaverse you do. And VR didn't have that. Virtual reality is like, maybe it's just like not as appealing of a term, or you think of the hardware or something, and it just doesn't feel like. I mean, it just wasn't a good meme. Let's be realistic. It's like you look like a tit when you got that thing on your face. But the metaverse is like a bigger idea that you can be involved in, whether or not you choose to like strap that thing on your face or use the platform or play the game or buy the object. So it feels like a smart hijack of a trend that is like established enough that now they've hijacked the trend, and now they're going to be the accelerant of the thing they hijacked.
After listening to you, Jack, I totally buy it. I think it's freaking genius, man. Even if it doesn't play out, let's say it doesn't work, you're right, they've completely hijacked it. We are in such a bubble, like the three of us in this Twitter bubble of like tech Twitter. But like, as you mentioned, and not even the people that aren't on Facebook, let's say 90% of people on Facebook, they're going to have no idea what I couldn't tell you what the metaverse is. I have no idea what the metaverse
is,
right?
I'm speaking to my friend who works at Facebook, and he's like, I don't believe in the metaverse. I mean, this is before we were making fun. And he was like, I live in the real world. And I'm like, all right, as you're messaging me on your phone, all right. Dude, all right.
No, but this, I mean, Bilal, you nailed it, right? Like, even the people at Facebook probably don't even know what the metaverse is. So these guys have totally jacked this term. I guess the downside would be like, you're putting all your chips onto this term, which might just fizzle, right? It'd be like if, essentially the equivalent is if Microsoft had basically renamed itself the browser in the mid-90s, right?
MS-DOS.
Yeah, MS-DOS.
MS-DOS Inc.
Or, you know what? Maybe it's like the World Wide Web is is more analogous to it. Like, is it, because it is this thing that's like a buzzword that encapsulates
everything, so
many different verticals, and nobody has a definition for it. It's like, you could use that descriptor of the metaverse. I mean, wasn't it from a novel or something? Wasn't it from
Neil
Snow
Stevenson?
Crash?
Yeah, from Neil Stevenson.
Yeah.
So just real quick, because there's some people listening to this who are like, what the hell is the metaverse? So like, I know you mentioned all these different things.
Us what's about.
No,
what's
I'm
the
reading the definition right now on Google, which is a virtual reality space in which users can interact with a computer-generated environment and other users. The way I've always thought metaverse, when it's been talked about, is like these virtual worlds. That could mean these gaming virtual worlds, or it could be, to me, like social media in a way is kind of virtual world. I'm posting pictures that are captured from the real physical world, and they're like ones and zeros on a screen. So to me, that was already kind of a manifestation of taking what's in the real world and turning it into digital stuff. Now, when we talk about metaverse, I think more of like the virtual worlds where there's actually property, and maybe we're replicating stuff that exists in the real world that isn't currently in the digital world, like property rights and financial assets and like things of value.
Well, let's take something tangible, right?
Yeah, go on.
So very tangible examples. Roblox is similar to what a metaverse would be, right? You're living, there's an economy there, you're spending most of your day there, whether you're building, you're playing, you're interacting with people. Fortnite is, people often call Epic the real metaverse company, right? Fortnite is tens of millions of people congregating in this digital space. I mean, right now it's just like them on their phones and keyboards, but in 5-10 years, you're going to be using the VR headsets, right?
Or you're going to have some even implant. Fortnite, just like you just said there, like didn't Travis Scott or someone do like
they got concerts there, exactly.
That is like, and it was actually like a new experience. It wasn't just trying to replicate what already exists in the physical world and putting it in the digital world. So yeah, that's kind of how I thought of it. Was there what do you guys think of when you think of that phrase though?
I think of it as a marketing term. Like, I think people are just hijacking it as a marketing thing. To be like, yeah, there's loads of new stuff, right? Loads of new valuable stuff's going to come out of this. But like you said, I played Doom on the freaking computers at my school in 1995 or whenever that was. And that was a metaverse. Like, the only difference with a VR headset is you just slam the screen up in front of your face. Like, all of this stuff is like packaging, in my opinion. And unless you're talking about like a fundamentally different, like, I think people who live and breathe crypto and decentralization would use the metaverse as an encapsulating term for like this independent digital world that we're building outside of, corporatized internet. But most of it runs on AWS. You get it through your AT&T connection and you plug in your Apple laptop to look at it. It's like, there's a lot of romanticism around it, and I'm all for it. I think the crazy thing about it is it can, because it's so like the power laws of the internet, if you have the level of like distribution and access that a Facebook does, it's like you can decide to become a thing. And I don't know. I don't think we talked about in this last episode, a lot of it has to do with like who you can get to work there and what you can get them to build, like you can change names and like position yourself a certain way, but the adoption curve is going to be driven by building things that people want to spend their time and attention on. And I think Facebook is currently losing that battle, right? Like at a macro level, there are platforms growing faster than Facebook, TikTok, and there's attention being spent in different places. Exactly. Like, and I don't know if like, I'm not a 15-year-old, but like I look at that like Mark Zuckerberg thing in a conference room and I'm like, does like a kid in the middle of America, like, do they aspire to be doing that? Like, do they want to do that? I don't really know if they do.
Well, let's talk let's talk about his vision, right? Like this is what I saw in this presentation. Again, just from the beginning, and you touched on it, Jack. It's him in this literally virtual conference room, right? With a virtual desk having virtual conversations. And it's literally what we're just doing now. It just with a headset on in this shared space. I'm sure they'll figure out some of the haptic stuff that'll make it feel like you're more in the space with people. I mean, I think both of you have basically said it more or less. Is like, I mean, we're on in the metaverse, right? Like I spend all day on my phone. I spend all day in digital environments. It's just how much better will that look? How many more senses will be brought to bear to that? Are you going to wear gloves? Are you going to wear glasses? Like how much more quote unquote real will it get? So I think that's Zuck's vision.
No, I definitely, no, that's, no, I completely agree, man. Well, the one question I have for you guys is, I think Jack, you just brought up something which made me think about it for a split second, which is kind of like what has Facebook done in terms of like inventing stuff in recent times, right? Like if you think of, they're executing at a crazy scale. Like I think they've been incredible in that way. But back in the day, they brought the news feed, right? And that was a huge innovation in the way we take in information. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the original Facebook was crazy with all the photo, unlimited photos and all that stuff. But if you think of the last few big iterations, even with Instagram, their biggest stuff has been stories, which came from Snapchat, Reels, which is the new thing, which has been growing, which they've taken basically from TikTok. And again, I don't know every single part of Facebook here, but to me, it feels like they've been really good at like copying other people and doing that at the right time. Like I think the way they did with stories was pretty incredible. But now you're saying like, okay, no, we're going to take people into this next phase, and maybe they do have the time for it. Who knows? But I'm not sure. Like I think the brand that you just said there is really I think that's quite a key point, because this isn't just like, oh, here's utility. This is something to do with cool. Like that's why Snapchat could even exist in the beginning, because it wasn't just about the best product is like the one that's best coded or whatever. It was like something completely new, and it was like stories. When I first went into Snapchat, I was like 20 something years old, and I was so confused. I was like, how the hell did you use this app?
I've never used Snapchat. I've never used it.
Oh my God. Dude, it's hard, man.
I remember the only time it clocked for me is I had to read a Mark Suster blog post, the investor, and he explained like all these things, and I felt like such a boomer. But I eventually was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Yeah, it goes away, whatever. Because in the beginning, you just know you're scratching the surface. So you're like, oh, people are sending dick pics that that disappear in 20 seconds, right? That's probably what it's being used for. And then you realize, oh no, people are creating, you can share so much more in a story than you would in a regular feed post, right? Which now, if you go on my Instagram, I haven't posted for like over a year or something, but I might post a story all the time. So I'm just saying, like, maybe they have the talent to do this, and I don't know enough about the virtual reality, team there. They clearly are really talented. So if that's going to be a leading part of it, and everything pivots around this whole new world of VR, AR, like these kind of 3D worlds and new features, that's kind of cool. But I think when we kind of sit that next to all the other stuff we talk about on the podcast, the decentralized nature of it, and like the core part of Web3, from what I can understand, is taking power away from just like this one central organization that like makes 99% of all the profits and the gain. I don't know if that's going to be embraced by, a big company like Facebook.
100%. Well, Jason Calacanis actually just tweeted, if you are in Web3, he just like 10 minutes ago, or Meta, do not take money from Zuck. He just said, his entire history is just rugging people. Is what he just tweeted.
Yeah, I mean, acquisition is the only way. It feels like, just be like a
That's a good point.
Your point, Bilal, about place is, I think, the perfect way to think about it is like you're asking people to like spend time somewhere, and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they're like invisible interfaces. Like they're just rails for you to like create culture on. So you write, you record, you post the images, but this is a visual interface that they are building that you are going to be the power behind, which is not analogous to what they've been building.
It's a different model completely, right?
Yeah, if you're talking about building like a ground up culture, generally it's the users that design the stuff or make the content that propels the growth of the platform. Like a TikTok, there is no interface on TikTok, basically, right? It's like it is just the stuff that people make, and that to me is like, I don't know if maybe a couple of things to think about, like the animojis. You remember the Apple Animoji things? Like it was a kind of a cool, like quirky thing for a second, and anybody who's still sending those now, I'm like, the fuck? It's weird. It didn't catch on, right? Because it's like a weird, like, I don't know, you go into a whole diatribe about why that didn't work, but it reminds me of that, and it reminds me of the Nintendo Wii. Do you remember that? Like the Skittles game that you would get out and play like at Christmas, maybe like every 2 years, when you remembered that you had a Nintendo Wii.
The boxing game.
One of the greatest selling consoles ever, by the way, and it hit the zeitgeist perfully.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
and it feels like it's like trying to bring back the Nintendo Wii.
Yeah.
In
fair enough.
15 years later. I don't know. There's some like dystopian vibes to it too. Like you can imagine getting home and like your partner is just sitting there on the fucking sofa with a like thing strapped on their face. Like it's even weirder than being in a Zoom meeting and being like, oh yeah, I'll be a second, right? You're just in there like.
Well, I don't know if you guys saw that the Black Mirror episode about the dude. He was basically playing this Street Fighter type game, but he'd just be going into the VR world and boning another dude. But like the other dude was a female character. I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, let's be 100% honest. Dude, I had a buddy who got an early version of Oculus, and he's like, "Yo, man, I'm not gonna lie, there's some creepy stuff in there."
Your friend, Tron?
Yeah, my buddy. Yeah. I've never had an Oculus. By the way, okay, actually, you know what? Let's do this quick thing. I don't want to spend too much time on Meta since we already talked about it last week, but let's compare it to some of the famous tech rebrands of all time, right? So we talked about Google last week. Bilal Zaidi worked at Google when they rebranded to Alphabet. Bilal, again, you're very confused by it, right? We can just talk about that quickly. A lot of confusion.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, at the time, it just felt like, why would you do this when you've got the number or one of the most recognized brands in the world? But in hindsight, I don't know how much of a difference it made.
Well, I think a point that was brought up by Ben Thompson, the tech writer, was like, so when you spin out Google and make it its own reporting division, and then you kind of throw all the junk away, make it its own thing, it's good for the stock, right? People are like, okay, wow, this business is freaking amazing. Here's all this dead weight that they're just kind of sealing off. The other thing that happened with that rebrand was Sergey Brin and Larry Page. That was their transition out of the company too, right? So that's in contrast to Facebook, whereas this is 100% Mark Zuckerberg founder-led rebranding, right? And I touched on it earlier, but it's like, if you look at it now, founder-led, this is the last one. Facebook's the last one. This is the only company that can get away with probably what they're doing right now, right? A full rebrand, because investors have been like, hey, Zuck took us to $1 trillion. We trust you. They just announced $50 billion a year in buybacks, or they'll do it in the next, I guess, 12 months. They're like, okay, that's kind of nice. It's like, he has credibility, right? And there's a whole segment of FinTwig. They just call it House of Zuck. It's just like they're believers, the same way that some people are believers in Elon, right? And fair enough, founder-led, he can turn this around. So I think, the most comparable example is when Steve Jobs came back in 1997 with Apple, right? Difference being he spent 10 years out of the company building Next Computer, building Pixar. But he obviously came back, turned the company. The iPod is what really turned the company around. But the first thing they did was an iMac. But they turned mobile, right? They caught that entire wave. Even before the mobile phone, they created the mobile experience with the iPod. So, could we look back in 20 years and be like, wow, Zuck just pulled off what Steve Jobs did?
Maybe
40 years ago?
I think it's a really good point. The one thing I was just going to say, though, the difference is, I don't know the numbers, but the number of people that are now on the internet versus the population of people that were buying, PCs, obviously a huge number of people still, of course. But now, what is it, like 3-4 billion people on the internet?
Right.
And basically everyone uses either Facebook, Instagram, or, a couple billion people do or whatever. And that's why I think the stakes are so much higher for a company like Facebook, because it's not just about selling a cool new product. You're basically pivoting into a whole new world, which most people don't even understand. So I think Apple did an amazing job of that, because they did invent stuff, right? There was an MP3 player before, but iPod was its own thing. It was an iPod. You have 10,000 songs in your pocket, and they're the kings of keeping it simple and really hammering home that brand, one product at a time. Versus a Google who has 100, and Facebook, which has, multiple brands and platforms. And I think they say 7 different apps that have 1 billion plus
family
users.
Of apps.
Exactly. So either way, I think it's pretty
you're
brave.
Right. It is much later in the process, and it is a complete, because Apple's always been about personal computing, right? It didn't matter what form computing was in. They're like, it's going to be more and more personal. And this is exactly what's happened, right? They've taken computing from your desk. They wanted a computer on everybody's desk. They've turned it into your pocket. And now AirPods, watch, they're getting closer and closer. Literally, that's mission, is make it as personal as possible. So, great point. I totally agree with that. The scale is very different. I think in business lore, though, is just the Steve Jobs comeback is just it's freaking The Dark Knight, right? It's in that level of a narrative. So the last one is Microsoft, obviously. So under Nadella, completely changed the company. They went from a Windows first company to a cloud first company. Windows first meant that, hey, Windows is our core asset, and every other part of the business will revolve around Windows. And obviously the problem with that is that it's not a very horizontal business, right? Cloud is a way bigger opportunity than Windows, which is what Nadella came in, completely pivoted the company. And that, I think on a scale level, to your point, Bilal, that would probably be similar. To pivot the entire company from Windows to cloud would be comparable to what
definitely
Zuck is trying to accomplish.
But just one thing to add to that, though, the difference is B2B versus B2C, or consumer facing, where my mom needs to understand what Metaverse is for her to use this in 5 years.
Don't sleep on Facebook Workplace, man.
That's true, actually. But anyway, no, really, I think that's an interesting discussion. The only last thing I was going to add was kind of what Jack said about the talent. I think that's a key part of this is, are they going to make the brand sexy enough to get that talent to say, oh, for the next 10 years, we want to build this crazy stuff. And time will tell if they, like Microsoft, I think did do a great job of like making it cool again within the circle of wanting to work there for a certain type of person anyway. Someone who's open to working in big tech. They previously for years weren't looking at Microsoft the way they did in early 2000s. And then they definitely made a comeback in that way. So I think that's one key part. And then the last point I mentioned earlier was the culture and the kind of cool factor. I know that sounds kind of like soft, but I think a lot of what we're seeing here is going beyond just like products being like the best utility product to something that's culturally based.
Right.
And like luxury, like the same way Apple became a luxury product, right? It's not like the best Android phone wasn't as good as the iPhone like 10 years ago. Like a lot of people would argue a lot of the early Nexus phones were as good, if not better. But the brand of Apple always was superior. And like that became a problem for Google as well. So anyway, anything else to add on that, boys? Really interesting either way.
My only last point would be, I didn't watch the presentation. So like, to what extent do you need hardware to participate in the new version of Facebook would be that's a good point. $1 trillion question.
Yeah, you mean like a virtual reality headset or something like that?
Yeah, or glasses. I know they said something about smart glasses or whatever. And if that's the case, then that's a whole different
huge
animal,
barrier.
Right? And if it's not that, then what, you're changing the news feed to like a little, you try and do like some like 3D experience on a 2D screen with like your fingers instead of a controller or like a game interface. It's just terrible. Like there's just no point in participating in it. So like props for the massive vision, but that's like they don't have a supply chain in the same way that Apple or whoever does, right? It's just an enormous undertaking. So,
and I think the acquisition point though you mentioned earlier, Jack, or I think you said it, that to me is interesting because if there are companies out there that you could acquire that have that kind of cool factor or they're emerging and you're like, oh, okay, most of the world didn't know about this, but they've got something going, that could be an interesting way for them to do it. At the same time, with all the troubles they've had with anti-competitive stuff and all the problems they've had recently, like, I don't know if they're buying any major companies soon.
Well, they have acquired a ton of VR companies actually, and people have been like, hey, you guys should they're saying basically the Department of Justice is 10 years behind. It's like you're prosecuting Facebook on social
surprise.
But these guys are buying up the next computing platform. The last thing I want to talk about on this, and less 30 seconds, is Apple will win the glass game. There's no just question in my mind. If you're trying to out hardware Apple, it's not going to happen. It's game over, right? I mean, that's probably the big elephant in this room. Zuck is repivoting the company. Who's going to win it? If you're going to make this a glasses and kind of like personal hardware game, right? Apple's going to win.
Operating system. Yeah, it's just
everything.
It's just
they already have the installed base.
Got the chips,
they already have the installed base.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyways,
we need to have a segment of like a rating system or something.
Oh my god! All right, hold on. Before we go to the next thing, if anybody's wondering why the lighting here is so good, it's because the good people at Elgato sent us lights.
Watch out, showbiz.
Yeah, they didn't even ask us. Like, this was not like, hey man, if we send you stuff, you have to say this. They didn't even ask us. Having said that, if anybody's ever read Robert Cialdini's book Influence, one of the most powerful levers of influence is reciprocity. And I'll tell you something about that. I was actually reading that book when I was in Cambodia, and I went to Angkor Wat, like a famous temple from the early, I think 1100s. And I go in there, as I was reading that book, I just read the chapter on reciprocity. And the TLDR is if somebody gives you something, you feel very inclined to give something back. And I had just read that chapter. As soon as I walk in the temple, a Cambodian dude gives me a candle. And I'm like, oh, no, it gives me a one of those scent incense.
Knock it out of his hand?
Yeah, no. He gives it to me. And I go, oh, thank you, man. And then he grabs my wrist and takes me to like a side room. And he's like, okay, you put it in here and give me money. I was like, oh, you got me. I feel, no, it's because I'm like, man, you gave this to me. I'm like, bro, I just read Cialdini's book, man. You're not getting me today.
I'm not sucker.
No, but I know, hold on, just last thing is I know I have a good buddy. He's like, I won't accept $1 from somebody else just because he knows how powerful reciprocity is. Literally will not accept like a coffee or anything. And it's a good code to live by. But having said that, Thank you, Elgato. You never, the lights are amazing, man. These are freaking amazing lights.
So you got your setup too, yeah? Because I'm going to do a little, I don't know if you can see my
camera, Trung.
Yeah, I'm using the camera. It's amazing, guys. It's the face cam Elgato and the lights. But anyways, we're doing this for the people. We're not doing ads,
let me show the people real quick.
Yeah,
look at this, on and off. You can't even see him. Look, where's he gone?
Yeah,
he's back.
Where's Bilal?
There he is. He's back in business. All right, boys.
Okay, that's good.
No, thanks, Elgato, for sending that to us. All right, boys, let's talk about inflation. This could be a whole episode on its own. Just to tee it up, Jack Dorsey, I'm not going to read out the full tweet. Essentially, in the last few weeks, he wrote something along the lines of, there's going to be hyperinflation, something like that. Like, it's kind of set.
I think he said it's already happening.
It's already happening.
Hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's already happening. That's nearly verbatim, I think.
All right, yeah, exactly. So that kind of set a chain of events off where everyone and their mother was talking about it, right? We had Elon Musk or Cathie Wood, Balaji, like a bunch of people. So we're not going to read out every single person's thing, but we wanted to talk about inflation because as it relates to Web3, like one of the, the biggest kind of reasons people buy Bitcoin nowadays is because people say that there's going to be high inflation, and traditionally you would buy gold, and nowadays Bitcoin is digital gold because it's limited supply, right? So let's talk a little bit about inflation. So we don't want to do economics 101 here, but just at a high level, inflation is average prices going up over time, right? Having a little bit of inflation is not a bad thing, obviously. It's okay to have like a few percentage points.
It's good. It means the economy is growing.
Growing, exactly. But when it starts hitting a certain point, maybe like beyond like 5-6%, like that's kind of where we're at right now.
Hyperinflation is 50% a month. If you want to talk about hyperinflation.
That's 50. That's hyperinflation.
That's like
I'm
Venezuela,
talking about regular inflation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Regular inflation is like right now it's about 2 to 3% year on year. Like a basket of goods, groceries, they usually take out energy because it's very volatile. But let's talk about the standard needs that we have, right? Groceries, day-to-day kind of services, and all these things that you need to just go about your life.
And also wages, right? Like
wage inflation.
Wage is a big part of that as well. So anyway, so that's kind of like, there's normal inflation, right? And then there's hyperinflation, like you said, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, where people are taking like buckets full of cash to go buy a loaf of bread, right? Like that. So I think when people read his tweet, which was about hyperinflation, to be fair, a lot of people kind of laughed it off and said, okay, this is dumb. Like all of a sudden, this guy with a beard, this shaman dude is telling the whole world like that is going to be hyperinflation. So we're going to discuss like how likely it is to ever be the case in a place like the US. But yeah, I guess, let's just throw it out there. Like, what do you guys think? Like, was he being off his rocket, or does he have a point?
The argument that a lot of people are making is he has access to Square's data, right? Square small business interaction point for commerce. He's got the payment portals. So they're saying, hey, you know what? He's got access to information which potentially could indicate that prices are going up. But you guys put it in the group, the Telegram chat group, right? Cathie Wood, the famous fund manager for ARK, she did a whole rebuttal thread to Jack's point. And I actually kind of lean more towards her side, which is essentially like, you have to really think about where is the things that matter in our day-to-day lives and how much have those costs gone up or down, right? So she's talking about technological deflation and, how much would you have paid to have access to the world's knowledge 20 years ago, right? Well, now it costs zero. So that's deflation, right? Where are the deflationary things that are happening? Access to entertainment is now deflationary. I don't have to go to the theater, spend $100 on a night out to watch the brand new movie. I can watch it at home for $10 a month. So there's a very famous and viral chart that went out. It was like, it showed what costs are going down and what costs are going up over the past 10, 20 years. And the ones that are service heavy, they require a lot of human interaction.
I think I've got it, Trung. Let me just.
Oh, you got it? Pull it up, right?
I think so. Is this the one?
It's basically, yeah, exactly. So the ones that are going up are healthcare, education, and childcare. The prices that are going down: TV, toys, computer software, telecommunications. So, there's when you talk about inflation, you have to describe what it is that's being inflated right now. So today, what are we looking at as inflation? The cost of chips going into cars are going up. the cost of getting some groceries and food inputs are going up. So if you go to a restaurant, I've noticed it. The restaurant prices I go to a lot of places they've all been up 10, 20%. And a lot of this has to do with supply chain issues.
Yeah. And like specifically supply chain for restaurants is like they've got a shortage of supply of workers, right? Like
they have a shortage of supply of workers and food and inputs. So like you have to ask where these things are. And Cathie's whole point is actually like technological innovation is causing a lot of deflation. It's going to be even more with, she says basically AI is widespread everywhere. So I guess is like when Jack Dorsey's talking about hyperinflation, well, like what is he talking about? Is he going to say that a loaf of bread is going to be $100 next year? It's so vague as to not communicate anything, right? Another thing about, and what the main criticism that he got, and with this I actually agree with, is this: central bankers, the whole job of a central banker nowadays basically is to guide the market. So that's why when they have these Fed meeting minutes, like they meet, I think every 2 months, those are just, people comb through those to see what they're saying, specifically because their job now is to guide the economy, right? The job of the U.S. central banker is to keep inflation around 2 to 3% and keep a certain level of employment. That's always a balance they're doing. Because if you raise interest rates, it's going to lead to unemployment because people are going to want to spend less and all that noise. But like the whole job of central bankers is to guide the population, guide investors. So when people are like saying, man, Jack Dorsey is going out there and just saying hyperinflation, not giving any rationale, you're scaring the psychology of people. And why that's dangerous is this: inflation is in many ways a psychological phenomenon. And the reason why these things spiral out of control is because I'm going to go to the grocery store and spend $2,000 and bid up everything because I think the price is going to go up next week, right? Like this is a psychology that's happening. Like if you go to places that have real hyperinflation like Venezuela, the reason why those things spiral out of control is because I'm going to buy all these potatoes now because next week I know
paper. We went through that last year, yeah.
Right? Because next week is going to be twice as much. So there's a psychology component to it. So that's the criticism. So those two things, I'm like, okay, is Jack right that maybe there's some supply chain constraints that will lead to inflation? Yes. Maybe my Lululemon pants might be a little bit more expensive this year. Is my internet going to be any more expensive? Probably not. I'm going to still enjoy entertainment. And you got to be very careful when you do these things and how you manage and talk about it, right? It's because it does create the psychology. And then my last thought, the counter is if you lie about it, and the meme that we've had over the past 3 months, the transitory inflation meme, is like, if you lie about it and it comes out to be not transitory, now you've lost credibility as a government, right? To control prices. And now it works in reverse. People don't believe you anymore. And we could talk about deflation, but deflation also has its effect, right? A deflationary economy is not good. It means no one's spending because they're expecting prices to fall next week. It's the opposite.
And there's austerity and all that sort of stuff, which we've seen examples of, like that shrinking approach. But yeah, so I mean, this is a wider kind of macro discussion, but I guess to strip this away from his statement, what's coming to mind for me is, the stuff we've talked about from episode 0 was printing money at exponential scale, 20% of all dollars printed last year or whatever it was. That alone, just the increase in money supply should cause some form of inflation, right? There's more money circulating around. The interest rates are basically zero, and money is cheap, right?
Right.
And
where's the money going though, right? Exactly. Where's the money going? We're seeing Shiba hit brand new highs. It's a $40 billion asset now. No, but seriously, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, Jack, you could probably talk about this with Sailor. Like that was the key for him. That was the unlock. He realized that all this money was causing asset inflation, which means just to stay on the treadmill, you had to gain 20% a year because the money supply was going up 20%, right? Like, Jack, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Full on fiat fan, that last segment. Love it.
That was econ CFA
fan coming through.
Yeah, like I don't have a CFA, nor did I study economics. My full financial education has come from Michael Saylor's 12-hour podcast.
That's even better.
Goat
right?
analogies are much better than econ 101, to be fair.
Asset inflation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think I hadn't heard I saw that retweet of talking about inflation can usher it into effect, and your explanation of it, Trung, was spot on. Where like people panic and they, go out and buy stuff. I think the extra context that was added to that diagram of the things where prices are inflating and prices are deflating, Balaji's comment on that is like by far and wide the top bracket is either like it's like heavily regulated, or there are state components or like governmental layers that exist within those
health
services,
and education.
Which is like in America an absolute travesty for the most part, right? The price of that stuff, like I'm self-employed. Celia and I pay $2,500 a month for health insurance, which is
it's
a salary
outrageous.
for a lot of people, you know?
I mean, it's insane for anyone, even for you if you're.
That's some good ass healthcare, man.
It's crazy.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
No,
it's terrible.
It's awful. But
crazy.
But those like anyway, that's getting off into a whole different subject. But the necessities of things that inflate, like you say, like the price of energy or the price of a place to live. Those things are the most concerning. Like if you're on fixed income and then you know your landlord says, hey, your rent's going up $1,000 a month because I know that you got X amount of stimulus money in the last 6 months. That's a phenomenon that happened too, right? Is there's that component of it where there's more dollars competing for the same amount of goods or resources, and then there's the leverage component on the other side of it, where if I have a certain amount of assets, I can borrow money at 1% interest, and then I can go and gobble up hundreds, thousands of houses or whatever asset it might be. I think the real estate is the most like brutal example when people are buying like real estate in the BlackRock story, right? The idea that home ownership is so out of reach is incredibly out of reach for a lot of people because they're, people who have access to capital can leverage themselves, buy real estate, and like essentially guarantee a return on their money by renting out this thing for more than they're paying for it.
They're being outbid by somebody
terms.
with $500 billion, basically, right?
Yeah, and that's just like, that is not like, I think ethically that's a disgrace. Like that's just the idea of keeping on the treadmill and like the money that you earn losing purchasing power is like, there's a great Sailor quote on this, which is like servitude is working exponentially harder for an asset that is getting exponentially weaker. And like, I think a lot of people don't understand the economic implications of this, but they feel it somehow, right? You feel like, man, how am I ever going to afford X? How am I ever going to get on the property ladder? And, I think I can't even empathize with the most aggressive like cases of that, but I can imagine what that's like. And I had a point to make there.
You think about that. I'm going to jump in with something quickly. And exactly what you touched on is, I did actually experience an inflationary environment when I lived in Vietnam. Nothing like hyperinflation, but I think at our worst. So basically the Vietnamese Communist Party had to devalue their currency a number of times. And because I was an awful negotiator then, I was paid in dong, Vietnamese dong. So I was losing 20 to 30% of my salary like every other month. And, but again, this is small beans. I'm by almost any measure, very privileged, just for the fact that I was born in freaking Western Canada, right? But I did feel for like a couple of years where you do feel poorer when there's an inflationary environment and you're paid in dong. And like, again, not woe is me, but like what I was paid in was going down repeatedly, right? And that small taste I had, I could totally understand the psyche of like, okay, hyperinflation, this is ugly.
But Trung, the thing is, for you understood what was happening, right? And I'm sure an average person in Vietnam, maybe maybe they did notice. Like I can't speak for millions of Vietnamese people, but I'm sure it gets to a certain point where you're like, oh wow,
what is happening? It's like,
what's
you're
happening?
right.
But the truth is, most people, we're nowhere near that stage here, right? Like most people think everything's all right. They, and like the bottom 50%, let's just say for the US anyway, in real terms in the last year, since the pandemic, have become exponentially poorer in, purchasing power terms, because most of those people don't own any assets. And for everyone else, including people like us who own some assets, whether that's real estate, Bitcoin, property, whatever, or stocks or whatever, all those things have been inflating in price. A lot of that is to do with this thing we're talking about, right? Asset inflation. And then the other thing I wanted to call out was Balaji's tweet. I've actually got it here. He said the problem is that the state controls much of the physical world, housing, education, and healthcare, but also ports, utilities, and the police. So the next costs after soaring rent and medical expenses will be supply chain shocks, power outages, and spending on crime mitigation. I thought that was like really well put. And he does then eventually go on to say he agrees with Cathie Wood on the deflationary nature of technology, like we just discussed before. But I think that's quite, and Jack, that's what you'd mentioned before, right? Which was a free market isn't controlling all those things, right? And there's still a limited supply of housing, right? And they're not able to just make more houses overnight. It takes many years to develop that and a focus on it and spending. So like the biggest thing for me, I mean, again, I can only speak for myself, but in New York, like the price of rent has been insane after it dropped during the pandemic. A friend of mine who I just saw yesterday just can't find a place. Like the prices are so much higher.
How much different? 2x, 50%?
I mean, he's saying what he was paying previously, his budget is now like almost double. And maybe because he's lived in a place that isn't New York, like he was in Austin for a while and his standards have probably gone up. Right. But like he's just like stuck and he's staying like month to month in a place right now because just the supply isn't there. And you know, fair enough. Like he's looking in downtown Manhattan, right? Like in these expensive places, and anyone with money is trying to live there. So it's not like everyone's seeing that. But I just think like if I think of what I spend my money on personally, it's rent, it's food, it's entertainment, seeing friends, that sort of stuff. And then if you've got kids, of course, that's like the big thing. Right. So like for me, all of those things are up for sure. Like
it sounds like your friend's like, yeah, I was looking for like a view of Central Park. I want 80 floors up. No, it's insane what the prices are now. I was like, I wanted a place that Jack was staying in a couple weeks back. Like how much? This is outrageous. So Jack, hold on a second. We cut Jack off there. Jack, were you able to gather that thought?
Yeah, I was going to go into the like behavioral outcome of it, like Wall Street bets, Shiba Inu, you know, Dogcoin mania is a byproduct of some of this too, right? Like this, I think the real troubling thing about it is that like it disincentivizes long-term thinking in a lot of ways. Like if you feel as though you can't get ahead slowly and steadily, then you're going to take bigger risks and you're going to make like, you're going to like gamble with
toads.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Like stuff that would be considered like an absolute, you know, hedge case. Don't do that 10 years ago is now like, well, why not? Like my whole check is going to this anyway. And I think maybe it ends up that people like start to investigate how money works and everybody has to, a few people have written about this idea of everybody has to become an investor in order to keep up, right? You just have to have exposure to the growth of something bigger than you in order to keep up. And there's so many extreme views on either side of this where it's like inflation is theft, right? This is like a human rights issue, and there's plenty of rabbit holes I could send people down on that side. And then there's like, you have to incentivize people to spend money to, you know, keep things going and, you know, stimulate an economy and things of that nature. But this last couple of years is just such a, such a one-off scenario where, without naming any names, I have people who are like, oh, the paycheck protection program for, you know, this business that has no overhead, we can claim $100,000 of paycheck protection money, right? And 85% of people who qualified for that took that money because like, oh, why wouldn't I? And then if you're in a position where you have more capital, you can then use that to your advantage to grow your business or to buy something that is like scarce, that then the rest of like you become a magnet for capital. And if you're on the other side of that equation, you're just like the button on the treadmill is getting pressed.
Yeah.
It's going faster. The hill is getting steeper. And there's, you know, a lot of people singing this song. It's like, you have to be exposed to asset growth that is not like trying to get wealthy or trying to get secure by holding cash in your bank account. I think however conservative you are at this point, nobody agrees with that, I don't think. Or a lot of people would say, objectively, that is not a good strategy at this point.
Well, Bilal, so Jack brought up the point that he was on the tip of his tongue when we so rudely cut him off was that brought up a great point. It's like when you're in this kind of dynamic, it kind of takes away long-term thinking, right? It's like
definitely.
You're watching everything around you and you're like, okay, what's the next dog meme coin that I can make like 100x in 6 months for? Nobody's thinking long-term anymore, right? And I mean, it's such an interesting point because maybe we look back in 20 years and be like, how warped all that $4 trillion that was printed that year, like changed the psychology of that entire generation. It's like, what are the effects going to be? We're not going to have builders anymore, people that are willing to do the long-term stuff. It could have really, really bad effects.
I think that's a great point as well. I didn't say that, but the disincentive to build, right? Where it's just like, oh, I could put my head down and build something and like churn out and try and acquire a customer a day and take my business from, even my experience building a business 3 years ago when I started, if all of this stuff had been going on around me, I'm like, why am I messing around for $100 a day,
no,
right?
Totally,
or like
right?
$1,000 a month. I'm like grinding my ass off to try and build this thing, and everyone else is just like kicking around on Discord and throwing $100 here and there, and seemingly crushing it. Everyone shares their wins, and a lot of people aren't beating the market. It's all nonsense, but it's like it's a huge amount of human potential that's going down the drain.
It's such a great point, man. It is a little bit depressing when you think about it.
No, boys, when you was talking about that, it kind of made me think of like the wider issue is of people feeling like no one's there to help them, like especially young people, right? If you're young, like if you were a college student paying mad money to be like, I had friends or like nieces and nephews and like friends of friends have little brothers and sisters. They were paying so much money to go to NYU or whatever in New York, where they're not even able to see anyone, and they spent all that money they'd already enrolled, and they're paying the same amount of money to do these Zoom classes, right? Like honestly, and I'm not like anti-university completely, but like just in that form, it's daylight robbery, right? Like you're
Bilal is 99% anti-university people.
Yeah, that 1% is left.
His 1% is left.
But no, it's that feeling, and also like the social stuff. Like people feel like, oh well, no one's looking out for me. Like I'm gonna have to look out for myself. And in a far extreme example, I'm sure we've experienced this with people that we know or have met. It gets to like the bad side, which is, oh well, I'm going to just do whatever I need to do because I need to feed my family, or I need to, and honestly, like even me growing up, I felt like that at times as well, like where I wasn't like super poor or anything, but we were kind of like middle working class, and you're just like, okay, well, no one's going to help me get into this place, so I'm just going to have to do what I need to do. And thankfully for me, I was like never doing anything illegal or anything, but definitely people that I went to school with and were friends with would take that past the bad line, you know what I mean? And I just feel like that sort of thinking is going to become more prevalent when you feel like, this is in the UK when you've got free healthcare and some social support. In America, you don't have anywhere near the same support. So I don't know, man. I think it's a bigger point beyond just like the inflation.
And
point.
Look at this. We got real macro today. We got real philosophical. With we have at NIA we have a lot of fun with these random kind of coins and NFTs. People, let's start building things, okay? Let's build real things that your grandchildren will be proud of.
We approve this message, man. That's a great point.
For real. All right, boys. Was there anything else? I mean, the only thing I had written here in the notes was, did we already talk about Square's data set, or did we bring up that point? Okay.
We touched on it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just that point was that Square has access to all this data, and he might not be making this all up. He could be seeing certain things because Square has access to all this stuff. The other thing was Flexport. I don't know if this is worth bringing up, but Flexport. Do you want to talk about it?
We can talk about it super quickly because we talked about the supply chain. Because it's about supply
chain. Yeah, let's expand on that a bit.
Ryan Peterson, the CEO of Flexport, which is it's a supply chain startup. They're basically trying to be the operating system for global trade. It's a very interesting company. But he's a very active executive in the sense that when something's going down, like for example, Flexport opened up taco trucks at the ports, right, to kind of feed the workers at the ports.
Gangster move, man. Love it.
Yeah, gangster move, right? And then he wrote this really viral thread about maybe 5 days ago, maybe a week, over the weekend. And basically, there's this huge backlog of ships in California, in Los Angeles specifically, trying to unload goods into LA ports. This is part of the supply chain issue. There's just so many goods backed up that they can't even unload them in time. And Ryan Peterson's just like, wait a second, what's going on here? So he literally chartered a boat, went around, looked at all the cranes, the ports, talked to all the people involved. And what he found out was there's some really actionable things that could be done. Is like some of the cranes were being idled because in Long Beach County, the rule was you can only stack these containers 2 containers high. And he's like, why can't we just do that 4, 5, or 6 high, right? You're tripling the capacity. And then that was like, that was the one that he actually put in the tweet thread. He's like, here's some solutions. He's like, executive order from the president of the United States making it okay to put 6 high containers. The Long Beach County mayor actually implemented that. He didn't credit Peterson, but this happened shortly after the thread, right? And then I guess two big takeaways from this is that I had was there is a problem with the supply chain, but it's very addressable. And Jack touched on it from the Balaji point. He's like, what's holding it back are these regulations, right? Certainly these regulations are in place for safety precautions. But as the mayor of Long Beach said, is like, we will allow 4 to 5 container highs as long as it meets these safety parameters. But there add up dozens of these small regulations, and you have a situation where you could really relieve kind of the supply chain bottleneck in these kind of ports in America. It's not going to solve everything, but I thought that was an instructive example of a fast moving, these tech executives get chirped a lot for being like, hey, they're so pie in the sky and they think everything can be optimized. Well, it turns out this one could be optimized, right? And when they're right, they should get credit. And the last thing I'll put on that was somebody put up a tweet was basically a California legislator, legislator the day before Ryan Peterson's tweet thread had said, this is my solutions to the bottleneck crisis. No more boats are allowed in the port of LA. That was their solution. Is that, It's like such a wrong-headed, non-engineering way to think of things. So that was a very salient example. But I wanted to ask Jack about this because this is something that's popping up now. They're saying that a lot of e-commerce businesses are about to get smacked in Q4 because for the last 10 years, you've been working e-commerce 5 years. It's just been a tailwind of like, you can hit any supply you want. You're just trying to generate demand, right? It's like, how do I generate demand? Jack's on Twitter all day tweeting out his new swag, right? That's how he's generating demand. But what happens? This is probably the first time you're facing the other side of it. Well, what happens if you can't meet the demand that's being generated, right? So Jack, are you seeing any of this? And like, man, what's happening with kind of the business here on the merch?
The first response I have thematically for the episode is you just sell swag in the metaverse, mate. But more seriously,
no, but I mean, you are though.
That's the way forward, mate.
That's what's going to happen. Like, I think that's an interesting. I don't know if Meta is going to be the where the Milan Fashion Week of the metaverse is going to happen, but it is going to happen, right? There's all of this stuff that if your identity is 80% digital, in the same way that like we're at the very rudimentary signaling phase of digital identity where you buy a JPEG and that's your profile picture, but there's a long way to go in the same way that we eventually evolved to carry $25,000 handbags or whatever people spend their money on in the real world. The stuff that we've been doing hasn't been that heavily impacted right now, but Celia's uncle actually has they import stuff from Italy all the time because they're building houses and like marble cabinets, all that kind of stuff. And apparently the cost of a container has gone up, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. And the time in which it takes to deliver it is 2-3x out. And then the ripple effects that has on, a project like building a house.
Yeah.
So like we're like really small stakes, like a sweatshirt going to one address is like, oh, it's going to be late. And then it comes. But if you think about like, just in time production and all of the dependencies of some supply chain that's any more complex than make the thing, send it to someone. It has this just incredible ripple effect.
Totally.
That's like, I was going to ask you, Trung, about the labor market, but that like, a job that you could say, hey, the stuff's going to be here. Crew needs to be there on that day to install it. Now it's like, don't know when it's going to be there. We need to put it on a hold. When it gets there, we need to do it really fast because now the client's been waiting X amount of time. And this is the only example that I have like personal exposure to. This is happening in every single industry that has any dependency on a part that exists in another part of the world. I used to work at Honda in my hometown in the UK.
In the factory, right? In the factory, right? In the factory,
yeah. And the logistics of that thing, it was just absolutely mind-blowing. Like a roll of metal would come into the factory and it would come out as a Honda Civic.
Legendary.
And then they had all of these amazing, obviously satellite places, which I worked at a few of those part-time, where you'd be like, the door, like the wheel thing for the window comes into one, and like the dependencies that exist to build new cars, just mental.
Does your former manager at Honda have any idea how much money you make from NFTs?
I honestly don't think he would remember my name, or like that was a real factory, man. Like
that was like a teenage kind of a weekend job thing. That was like a teenage weekend job.
No, it was a full-time job before I went to university. I did it 6 days a week.
Holy smoke! Do you talk to anybody still from that Honda factory? We need to tease this out, brother.
He's got some more stories for that.
Oh my goodness, bro!
We gotta get that out of him in a minute.
Okay, hold on. You still okay? You still have some friends. I'm not done with you, man. Hold on. So what? Okay.
Trung's in the zone. He leaned in.
Jack Butcher wakes up on Monday. What time are you waking up? How are you getting to the factory? What does the day at the factory look like?
So they had, I think the shift started at 5:50 in the morning. I lived about 20 minutes away, and you get a £60 bonus for every for clocking in on time for every shift, or 10 minutes before every shift.
Well, £60. How much was that of a day's wage? That sounds very material.
Yeah, that sounds significant.
It's
50%? 50% of a day's wage?
Probably up there. Yeah, probably close to that. And they would frame it as like every minute the line goes down, you're costing us 12 grand. Because that's how much a car was selling for.
Dude.
So that's like what they're beating into you in the training class. And
how
then
many people arrived on time?
Everyone. I mean,
it's like, amazing.
It's very rare that anyone everyone wants that beer money, man. Nobody's.
Okay, so you get there early. You get there 10 minutes early. You get what's next?
They play a song and you're supposed to stretch. It's like a Japanese ritual thing. So they pipe a song into the factory. It's like the
Seven Dwarves in the Snow White, man. Like freaking literally walk into the mines. Okay. This is amazing. Okay, what's next?
Everyone has you have a white overall with the name on. It doesn't, like the CEO, everybody wears the same stuff. So that's kind of cool. And you could tell how experienced someone is by how gray the suit is. So if you walk in with the like starched, brilliant white suit, you're getting, they used to do sheep calls. So you get the bah whenever because you're young, like just started. And then your shift, man, we did 370 cars a day, I think. And you'd be on one process. So it'd be like, I worked on the mud shield on the bottom of the car, 15 bolts or so.
Oh my God.
And you just do that 370 times a day.
Straight Henry Ford, right? Just the line. Doubt. Work on the line. That's amazing. Okay, dude. So, and afterwards, you did that all day. How long was lunch? What did you eat for lunch? And then what did you do after work? I love this shit, man.
Lunch, I think, was probably about 40 minutes. And they had a morning break. It was 15 minutes, and then a lunch that was 40 or 45 minutes. On the morning break, I get what they call a breakfast bap, which was bacon and sausage, an egg in a roll. It's fantastic,
delicious, right?
And then for lunch, I'd have Japanese curry. It's like
with the katsudon.
Oh, that's good.
Oh my goodness, bro!
Subsidized. It was like £1.30 a plate or something. It was
incredible.
Wait, oh my goodness. Okay,
sounds like a good life, man.
Yeah, that's not bad, brother. And then after work, did you get beer 6 days? How many days a week were you getting a beer with the boys?
You know what? Actually, that time, because I had that was a year before I went to university, and all my good mates went to university
A year before you.
A year before me. So my material memory from that period of time, I would go home and work on my design portfolio to try and get into university next year. Yeah.
Dude, you're basically like Eminem from 8 Mile. Like you were working at the factory.
That's what I was thinking as well. Oh
you're
my
working
God,
at the factory, going back to the home, eat mom's spaghetti.
Yeah.
and then just writing your rhymes. Oh my God, that's amazing, bro.
Mental, good times, man.
I will say this. So I'm 36 years old. The most honest work I've ever done in my life is I did construction for 2 months.
Oh my God.
But it's the same, right? But it's not that much different with Jackie. But the whole point is like, I got there, never late. I got there 8:30 every morning. It was a full 8-hour day. It's not like now where I can break off and go on Twitter for an hour, right?
Well, you could do a podcast during the day.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a full 8-hour day, 30-minute lunch. My job for those 6 weeks or whatever, 2 months I was doing, I was like digging out someone's basement, right? It's like, I told my wife, it's like the most honest work I've ever done because it was literally 8 hours a day. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like $15 an hour, 8 hours a day. Like that was your job. There was no dicking around. And then, last thing I'll say about that is like, when people ask me like, oh, what are you gonna do with your kids? Like, what's the plan? It's like, I need my kid to do something like that. They need to know how, quote unquote, they need to know the comparisons. Like that could be your life. That's fine if you want that, but you need to know that like that's what real, blue collar work looks like, which is fine if you want to do that. No problem at all with that. It's like, just know that is what it is. And it's real. It is real work, right? It's like, this is why we talked about a couple episodes ago. It's like, you have marketing departments with 200 people. Like how much of that is real work, right? Me digging out someone's basement, like maybe it's just one person's house. That's as real as it gets.
For real.
Realistic, yes.
Jack's got a few more. Maybe we'll save them for another segment, like worst jobs or something. But Jack, when you came to New York, I remember you telling me the story as well. Like sleeping on some guy's sofa for ages and like
goodness,
ridiculous. Bro. Like I don't know how much of that you'll have to share or what, but yeah, you have to maybe think of through in your head.
Well, here, let's hit Bilal. What is the most blue collar job you've ever done?
I mean, honestly, for me, man, like. I don't know. It wasn't like as much physical labor, but I did like these ridiculous. Like I remember traveling 2 hours on like 3 to 4 buses, to do like fucking tele sales, like on a phone. Like when I was like 16, it was crazy. Have I ever told you this before? It was selling
no, sounds good though.
Kitchens. It was selling kitchens on the phone.
You should work for Celia's family.
I know. I know. Literally, I go in there and you read a script, and then after a few calls, I'm like, this script doesn't work, so let me go off script. And then I eventually got it to work, and they called me upstairs and like, you got to stick to the script. And I was like, all right, this isn't going to work.
This is how Bilal gets his podcast guests. Hi.
Yeah, and then that other one I say it was face to face. I thought I was doing like an internship. Marketing internship I was applying for. I turned up in my suit again when I was about 18 in Oxford Street in London, and they're like, all right, yeah, we're about to go out now. And I'm like, go out? Like, I thought this is an interview and I thought it was marketing. They said, oh yeah, it's word of mouth marketing. So I'm like, oh, you mean sales? All right, so we go outside.
Mormons, dog, get door to
door.
Exactly,
and the job was to go and approach random people on Oxford Street, like one of the busiest streets in London, and sell them a haircut. Like a woman's haircut, like a 200-pound haircut. And also, I made a big mistake that day. Calling someone. I learned my mistake.
Yeah, so they wanted a Pakistani British dude to go sell 200-pound haircuts.
So dumb. It was so dumb. And then and to be honest, because I started that e-commerce thing when I was 16, so I had that already making some money. I was doing this to get like real experience. So I kept going to all these things. I wasn't really there to get lots of money, but I was like, man, this is so dumb. Like I don't want to do this ever again. But so that's probably, those were 2 pretty bad ones. But honestly, I'm quite lucky I didn't have to do like construction or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's nothing wrong with it, like you said, but I'm the worst, man. You can't see, I've got this little bed on the corner, on the wall here. It took me like 2 weeks. Put that together.
I suck too, man. I'm not good at that shit. Fair enough, man.
All right. Anyway,
I got one other one. I'll tell another time. I worked at an industrial shredders. That was like we had a massive contract with the police force in the UK. So it was a night shift, and you would get these trucks. The trucks come in and they just dump bags
Oh my
of like
God.
evidence and shit like that. And you just have to shred it, like sweep it
Just
into
light it
a
on
big.
fire.
office.
What's the worst thing that could happen if you just light it all on fire?
It's called, they're a big company. They have them over here. You see the trucks, Iron Mountain.
Oh
seen
yeah,
those trucks?
I've seen those. They're massive.
Yeah. Industrial shredder.
Dude, hold on.
That was a good one.
Let me see how big of a company they are. Actually.
All right, let's pull it back. We've got a couple more things to put. If you're still with us, if you enjoy that little segment, let us know. But we'll get back to the last thing on inflation before we move on. I just want to ask you guys, how do you think this plays out? I mean, because beyond the hyperinflation thing, like where do you think this nets out essentially? Like I know the easy answer is in the middle from what they both said. Maybe that's both your answers, but like the question I have is, I've been trying to figure this out, is with the continued printing of money, that to me just has to cause inflation. Like I don't think it's 5%. I think it's higher. Like where does it? At some point, you can't do that forever. So I'm curious, like where do you think that nets out?
If I had to give one answer where I have pretty reasonably high confidence, it is, and we've talked about it. We touched on it a couple of times already. It's the wage inflation we're talking about, and something. If from an econ 101 perspective, the tricky thing about wage inflation is this. With an orange, if there's an inflation and price goes up on an orange, you can mark it back down in a couple of weeks. Wage inflation is really tricky because if you give somebody $15 to $20 an hour, they ain't going back. Wage inflation, they call it sticky, and it's sticky for a reason. It tends to stay. So what is going to happen is this, and Jack touched on it with the employees at at Celius Family's contractors. They want more money. They're going to have to get more money because the labor market's tight. So they're going to get more money, and that those higher wages, they're probably going to stay. So when we're talking about inflation, wage inflation is a very permanent kind of thing.
Yeah, it's hard to reverse.
Right, and then this is where my high confidence comes in. So if I'm just doing pure logic train, if I think wage inflation is definitely coming in the next 12 months, and I think it's a pretty high possibility it is. That means wage inflation it's sticky. It's going to stay. What's going to happen? Companies are going to start automating like crazy, man. It's going to start making sense for them to automate. We're starting to see it. We've seen it over the last couple of years. You go to a freaking grocery, you got to bag your own groceries. You go to some fast food chains now, you got freaking robots making your food. It incentivizes people and companies to invest in these robots. And then the third part of that is like, okay, does that mean everybody's going to lose their job? Well, actually, hopefully what happens is that people don't have to do these more menial tasks now. And if there's a great unlock, maybe it's a metaverse, maybe this is Zuck's grand vision in the end, there's another place for people to express themselves as humans and, make money. But yeah, I think wage inflation leading to more automation and then other ways for people to make money, which is maybe more human and taps into the emotions more. That's where I see it happening.
So you're basically saying there is no second best is going to be the case, all right? So, I think that's a really good answer, actually. Jack, do you have any thoughts on that, mate?
Yeah, I think I agree with Trung, and I think UBI, unrealized capital gains tax, is coming.
It's coming, bro.
That's got to be a reason why the labor market is tight in some ways too, is like the accessibility of speculation and the 100 re-rolls of the dice there. I just think the capital that is like sloshing around in markets that are now global, right? It's a very different scenario to try and capture tax revenue from when people aren't like paying on a W-2 their federal income tax. It's like it's going to be a way more complicated way. Like we're only just beginning to crest this like investing as pop culture. Coinbase is the number one download app on the App Store. You see that yesterday? And
they changed the title to say trade Bitcoin,
SHIB,
ETH, and Shiba. Yeah. It's so for
shit.
the search, because people are searching, how do I invest in SHIB? Yeah. So
Jack, amazing
nice
point, by the way. I had not connected those two. The Balaji point that everybody's going to be an investor, like in the 21st century. So you start taxing that base, right? If labor is no longer the main job, day-to-day labor that we kind of know it, and investing is, you bet your ass those capital gains taxes are coming for everyone.
Yeah, tax speculation. And I think like, man, I don't know. I think the IRS is already like 10 years underwater on figuring out how to audit people's tax liability, and like people's income is getting that much more complicated, right? I think the W-2, even contractors, people who work multiple jobs, and maybe they're pulling money in and out of Coinbase or Robinhood or whatever it is. I don't think the majority of people even understand how to file tax.
Yeah.
So you saw this other, like, we're going to start monitoring bank accounts of $600 or more, or transactions. Do you see that? We're going to see that. Banks were going to have to report every transaction on a account that holds $600 or more.
Bros, come to Canada, man. Come to Canada. Out of there, bro.
Yeah. But I think they see it, like the writing's on the wall, right? It's like, we're going to have to increase our visibility into the money supply in order to try and rake back
the money supply we created.
Right. It's just crazy, man. I think it's wild times. And the US is still like the North Star, right? All of this, I think that was in one of Jack's doomsday replies. He's like, as goes the US, so goes the world.
Dude, so cryptic.
Yeah. All right. The last thing I'll say is, I don't know if you guys watched this famous video from Ray Dalio. It's 30 minutes on like how money works. Yeah,
how the debt machine works.
Yeah. So again, we don't have time to like go into the whole thing, but what he talks about, I recommend it. I think it's a pretty good summary of like short-term and long-term debt cycles. But I'm just looking at what I wrote here. There's basically like 4 different ways that you move, like that you can affect the economy. There's cutting spending, reducing debt, redistributing wealth, and printing money, right? Yeah. And basically, like, they normally happen in waves because some of them are inflationary and some of them are deflationary. So I think eventually we're going to get to the point where we're going to have to suppress, or like, what's the word? Not inflate, like deflate, basically. And we've seen it in other countries. Like, some countries were already doing austerity measures, like in the UK that happened. And I just think, like, long term, like, someone's paying for this, right? Like, we've had an abundance of money and zero interest rates. It's been really, really good years for asset prices and stuff like that. Generally, I feel like positive about a lot of that stuff, but at the same time, I do think, like, eventually it's not, you don't get a free ride, you know what I mean? So whether that's our kids or their kids are paying crazy taxes in the future, right, or interest rates are at crazy high levels in 20 years, and they're going to look back and be like, oh, they used to get money for free and they were buying Shiba coins with it. You know what I mean? Like, that, it doesn't seem that unlikely to me. So I don't know, man. I think it probably is in between those two things, but my general take is that inflation is going to be heating up for a little bit still.
No, but the last thing I want to add was that I totally agree with you, is like, somebody's going to pay for this eventually. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right?
Completely.
One more thing I was going to say about labor market. I got a couple of friends who run agencies with international workforces, right? And before COVID, there was a huge disparity in pay based on where people lived. And now it's like, well, you can't pay somebody in the Philippines a fifth of what you're paying somebody in New Zealand or Australia because they live in the Philippines. They're doing the same job. And now your employee that's coming to the office every day isn't anymore. So I think we talk about this in crypto, but it's not even really crypto. It's just like the sort of liquidity of the internet as it pertains to talent really changes all of this stuff too. It's like your tax base lives in America, but the way they earn, like, they're either like investing in global markets or they're working for global businesses. It's like, it definitely
levels
feels
the playing
like
field in that way.
It levels the playing field, but also, like, if you live in a country where the cost of living is like, really you can live really well in some places, and in other places, as it balances out, like, everybody that's fat and happy in the first world country is like, oh shit, it's not as easy. I can't just like go to work and LARP for 38 hours a week and then bang out a couple of emails and collect my check.
You ain't LARPing in construction, I'll tell you that right now.
No,
you can't LARP digging out someone's basement.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see, like, obviously globalization and like the internet showed us other people's worlds a lot more. People travel more and see the world a little bit more. But now we're forcibly going to see it in a lot of industries where, like you just said, like the wages aren't necessarily going to be paid because at the same level because you live in New York versus, the Philippines or whatever. And even like when I moved within Google from Dublin to London and New York, I remember like the pay, you're doing the same job and the pay changed based on where you lived. And London and New York was one of the worst moves you could make. Oh, sorry, was one of the best moves you could make, because London, you were just criminally underpaid and it still cost a lot to live there, versus moving here, you get like a nice bump, right? And the thing is though, like we get all of these benefits, like the iPhone in our pocket, like we get that for $1,000 because we just completely oblivious or just ignore the fact it's made by, like really cheap labor, or in some cases worse than that. And we just all kind of get on with it and say, oh yeah, well that's cool. That's just how we live here. But like it's harder to ignore when you actually see it. You know what I mean? So I think there's going to be more examples of that when you're having a meeting with people from all around the world. If you're working in a small 20-person startup or something, and they've actually got half the people being paid a similar amount, like there's this move where a lot of companies are paying, like you said, like just the same amount depending on the job. But in most cases, that means the people who in the Philippines are now getting paid way more, versus like like your salary in the US going down dramatically because they still need to retain you. So I think overall that's a good thing. But anyway,
we're gonna need some Bilal Dublin stories soon.
Oh man, yeah, yeah, definitely, man. I'm all for that.
Let me just add this: Iron Mountain made $4.5 billion last year. So, Jack, huge business, man, shredding papers. They have other information management, but I can finish if you guys want. The last thing I wanted to touch on was just also inflation related, since we went so deep today. Jack talked about how much he's paying for healthcare, and I'll do a fun fact fan because we haven't done it today. But why is it that in the United States that healthcare is so tied to employment? It comes from World War II. During World War II, there were price controls and labor wages controls. So like, you're building tanks and aircraft carriers to go fight the Nazis and the Japanese. They kept the price wages at certain levels, right? So like if you had this national emergency and the labor's demanding more money, they probably could get it. So they're just like, okay, we're just putting a price controls on how much you can charge for things and wage controls. So basically the way a lot of employers got around that was like, if I can't offer you more salary, I'm going to offer you health benefits. And basically that's what happened after World War II. It's like health benefits got fused in with corporate jobs. And that's why now, obviously, you guys have been through it. When you're trying to find somewhere to work in America, one of the first things you get is like, hey, what is your health insurance package at this corporation? And that's the reason why. Anyways, that's it.
History Professor Phan is back. Love it, man.
Love it, mate.
Yeah, that was a good discussion, boys. I think we can wrap it up. I know we wanted to talk about Formula One and NFTs, but we can shelve that.
That was crazy. That was great, man. I did not expect to go that deep on inflation with you guys.
No, that was really good. Yeah, I think we have some investment advice to give, which I will keep in my head. But
yeah, fair enough, man.
Yeah, just listen to the Sailor series, I guess. But no. But yeah, anything else, boys, before we wrap up?
No, we're good, man. I'm good here, Jack.
That was great.
No, yeah, that was fun. All right, boys. Yeah, anyway, as always, this is not investment advice. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. And we will see you next week on the podcast.
Yeah. Peace out, guys. Thank you.